Wow, I am feeling so sentimental. um, hey everyone, this is Minerva Sweeney Wren / Meg McCauley. I think I just smacked my headset with my hand, which you probably heard. So just full disclosure at the top of this, I will not be sound editing at quite the same level that I would for episodes, just because this is my chance to actually chat with you. Kind of as me and as the author to the reader and as friend to friend and mod enthusiast to mod enthusiast. But I've been wanting to do this behind the scenes episode for a really long time. There is some kind of fun backstory behind how everything got started and, you know, the relevance of this podcast to my personal life. Because there's been some really insane crossover. There's almost, I could honestly write a novel about the story within the story and how so much of the events of this podcast corresponded to events in my real life. Starting out super lonely, super insecure. I have very serious mental health struggles. Please don't worry about me. I have an amazing therapist. I'm doing really, really well right now, but I had a very difficult childhood in a lot of ways and in a very complex way, which I'm actually going to be a lot more transparent about in The Ghost Catchers, which is my upcoming audio drama. There's going to be a lot of tie-in to kind of where I come from and my backstory. But all that being said, kind of the mental health journey that Maud goes on not only was, you know, authentic to what was happening to me, it was happening in sync in a really interesting way. Because I would have wanted to have taken Maud on a beautiful journey no matter what, but I was kind of simultaneously going on a beautiful journey and actually finding community and actually learning this new trust in myself. And so if for you, there was a kind of magic in the audio drama in terms of, wait, this feels real. Something about this feels real. That's because it really was real. Maud is a character. She is not fully myself. There are a lot of bits of me in her for sure. As I grow as a person, I'll probably be a little less like Maud in my day-to-day. But she was a really authentic part of me in a lot of ways. Also a character that I acted, for sure. Like, she's not completely me. I did feel like I put on a part a little bit. But a lot of this, you know, there was almost like me writing in my diary. And I was writing about, you know, stories and events and, you know, crafting and being creative. But simultaneously, some of that deeper stuff was really authentically what I was dealing with. I really do have someone in my life who is, you know, a little bit, I really want them to have a beautiful future in the same way that Ariana and Maud wants Ariana to have a beautiful future. And that's maybe not as easy to see. But anyway, I've just dived in now and I've been blathering for a full 3 minutes, so this is going to go great. But right off the bat, I want to say I did have a script for this, and I'm going to try to not use the script as much as I can. I really want to just talk from the heart and have this be more authentic. So bear with me if I completely lose my train of thought. But speaking of, you know, completely random things that I could share with you, since this is just completely spur of the moment, is I'm sitting in my closet, which is where I do my recording. Looking up, I have a bunch of fake foliage hanging from the ceiling, so it looks a little bit like a forest. The walls are painted dark pink. Have a bunch of vintage posters in here. I have 3 little postcards of like witch houses that I got from Comic-Con that are just charming. One of them has an eyeball in the window because, you know, I love eyeballs. But, and also in other super exciting news, this is the very first time I have properly used my brand new microphone, which is, if you're a patron or if you have ever been a patron, please bow, pat yourself on the back. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of the support. That money really does go to producing this podcast and the Ghost Catchers as well. There's a lot of, you know, day-to-day stuff that needs to get paid for, and then it's really cool to have awesome equipment like this. I'm really enjoying it. And then other fun fact about my situation is my glittery Minnie Mouse ears from Disney World are sitting right here with me too, because of course they stay on my wall, because that's just who I am as a person. And I also have cookies and tea, which I think is what Maud would do, is have cookies and tea. But now I will actually dive in and try to talk more specifically about the podcast and about the story. But I really appreciate you all is one of the other things I really want to stress at the beginning of this. From the bottom of my heart, if you're involved in, you know, the early days of the podcast, if you're one of my first fans on Twitter or people who interacted with me on Instagram, or anywhere online, on Twitter especially, like, it just meant the world to me to have that kind of, not really face to face, but that really personal interaction with someone who appreciated my story. Again, I'll probably bring it up a couple more times before this behind the scenes episode is over, but I did, and to a certain extent I still do, have very, very serious mental health struggles, kind of akin to PTSD, to where I spent and sometimes spend the majority of my day in full-on fight or flight, just because of just some difficult circumstances around my childhood, and I just kind of grew up in a very different kind of situation. So I have a lot of fear, and I have a lot of, like, a complete lack of trust in my own ability to do anything and do anything well. But I think we heal by interacting with people, and we heal through relationships. And I know for you guys, you were probably like, oh, like, okay, like, I had a cute little interaction and we had a little back and forth, but like, it really does it means something to me. It means a lot to me that, we had those conversations and those interactions early on. And, just in case in 5 years from now, someone's actually still listening to this in 5 years, which is a weird thought. It's no less significant to have those face-to-face interactions. And I'd love to be a published novelist someday and do book signings and actually meet everyone. And I don't ever want to lose sight of, there's something so profound about being able to connect in person with someone who has listened to a story of mine from start to finish, because I feel like, I don't know, we've shared something together, because Maud is very precious to me and this story is very precious to me, and it's precious to you too. And so even though we're all strangers and we'll most likely not be, friends in real life, there's this shared experience that I think is really profound. So anyway, I wanted to let you all know that I really appreciate you. I do. It really means something to me, and all of you mean something to me. Everyone who is a patron, past or present, or just has said something encouraging online, you're very appreciated, and I want you to know that. But let's dive in now to the real behind the scenes, and all the funny stories and all the questions. I know some fans have had some really specific questions that I'm really hoping to answer here today, especially about diversity and where that comes from and whether or not that's real, and some questions about Noble and about Maud, and then just quirky things about the podcast and where the ideas come from and how it all got started. So I think the first question that I'll answer is, how did I produce this? Which is, normally as a writer, I write very intentionally. I spend a lot of time editing, and I usually figure out the story in advance. But for this, I'm either going to edit out that cough later or not, but I'm going to pause now. I need to cough. Okay, done coughing. But yeah, for McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop, it was a very strange thing, and that I never edited the story events later, and I never really edited the episodes. In later seasons, I would go through and I would try to improve the writing a little bit, although from the bottom of my heart, I think you guys are going to maybe notice a quality shift in the writing between McGillicuddy Murder's Pawn Shop and the Ghost Catchers, just because I'm being a lot more intentional with the writing with the Ghost Catchers, and McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop has always just been, it's just been kind of like this. It's actually, honestly, it's been a healing experience for me, because as a writer, I can second guess myself a lot, and I'll self-edit a lot. And with this, the goal from the beginning was just to be completely cathartic and creative all at once, and just dump it out on paper, figure it out literally as I went, and see what happened. And so the entire story from start to finish, and I guarantee this from the bottom of my heart, nothing was planned in advance. Most story elements I was figuring out as my fingers were typing it out on the keyboard. And I'm really pleased ultimately with the way that turned out. I do hope you guys like the ending. That's always the most nerve-wracking thing about ending a story, is just worrying that, I let you all down, because it's been, over 3 years, and we're all waiting for it to end, and we all kind of wanted to end in a certain way. And I hope the ending is wonderful for you and you really enjoy it and it works out well. But what I did want to do, just kind of on a personal note, is finish the podcast the way that I started and just kind of watch what happens. Be with Maud, be with the characters, and, just type and, just from my gut, see what happened and see how the story transformed. And so it really did all just come from this super organic place, almost like I was finding Maud's diary, and channeling it, which I think is kind of sweet. So that's how the story is produced, is it's just fully, from the hip, I guess. The next question I will answer is, why did it begin? Why did I do this? Why did I start this podcast? And I think to tie in with that, producing this has been one of the most transformative experiences of my life. Again, a profound level of self-doubt. I want to be a novelist. I had been trying to break into that market for a really long time. It's like trying to make it in Hollywood. It's very, very difficult. There are, without exaggeration, millions of people trying to get the attention of literary agents and publishing houses. I've been really driven. I want to get published, by like one of the big five. I want to, make it all the way to the top, be at the top. So I'm super ambitious, but there were just so many no's that I genuinely thought I had no talent whatsoever. It was really feeding into this negative cycle of thinking that I couldn't do anything and I had no skill and my characters weren't lovable and, everything was just wrong. Nothing was working. But back in 2018, when I started the podcast, I had just started posting some novels up on a social media site where you theoretically could make money. Like, people would pay like 15 cents a chapter to read, and I've since dropped off of there. It didn't end up being quite the platform that I wanted it to be. Some of you will probably notice those links still existing in early episodes, unless I can find a way to take that down. I don't know if there's a way to take that down. But so I wrote those books, and it was great to publish them, but I was really just trying to find a way to market it. I was like, how am I going to get more people to know that this exists? And so McGillicuddy and Murder's Pawn Shop was like a side project as like a marketing scheme for those books. I was like, oh, I should do a podcast. That would be fun. The only audio drama I had ever been familiar with was Welcome to Night Vale, which I'd heard like an episode of, and I thought it was really kind of charming and a cool idea. But I was absolutely terrified. I refused to look up other audio dramas. I didn't want to know what my competition was. I didn't want to know. I was really freaked out. I had, just like super panicky, just like poor little frightened bunny rabbit that I was. But I thought, oh gosh, both my parents are actors. I did some theater in high school. I can probably be okay. I had very little faith in my acting abilities, but I was like, you know what? I can probably at least read the book out loud. It'll be okay. And I did a couple of sound tests with me reading different scripts, which is really funny. And I found that I was a lot less practiced in acting and voiceover work at the time as well. And I found that I thought I sounded the most professional and the most believable when I was reading something creepy. And I think that's so funny because I really love, creepiness and sort of vintage horror. But I think my love of that has really bloomed and come home while producing this podcast. But I genuinely chose kind of the creepy angle, more so just because I thought I could pull it off, voice acting wise. And I did it super spur of the moment. I was moving cities. I had moving boxes all over my floor. My husband and we just own one car. He had it for the day. I decided, I think in one day, that I was going to do this. I walked half an hour in blistering July heat to Best Buy, bought a little microphone, and walked back and started recording the first episode. Or, that might have been the day that I tested it. I don't remember anymore. It was such a long time ago. But on that same note, so the day that I wrote the first episode, and this is kind of a fun fact, I'm a little bit more private about where I'm located, which I'm sure at some point you guys will find out what city I live in. But at the time I was living in Milwaukee. So before I moved, I was living in Milwaukee, which is actually where I grew up. And I think this coffee shop is still there. You can, it's so funny too. It's in southern Milwaukee and it's right by this really wonderful district that's full of antique stores. Like, it's full of antique stores. And one of the stores has kind of an upper level where in my head I still kind of picture the upstairs of McGillicuddy Murders Pawn Shop with this same similar layout. So if you're in that area or close to it and you kind of want to poke around as like a behind the scenes adventure, that's a really fun place to visit. But this coffee shop was just down the road, and I hadn't been there since. I was only been there once in my life. But I went in, I got a drink, I sat at this little vintage table up in the window, in this super old building, and I knew I wanted to write the first episode, 10 minutes. I was like, okay, it's only 1,500 words. I can handle this in one sitting, no problem. I'm just going to write episode 1 of a podcast. And I think at that time, the only thing that I knew was that I wanted to call it McGillicuddy and Murders Pawn Shop. Because I've always loved antiques. I've always thought that there's some sort of like story waiting behind antiques. I thought there'd be cool to have some sort of little magic system behind like the stories and the history in antique objects. And that was the only little germ of an idea that I had. And again, I was starting this whole adventure super impetuously, like, oh, I'm just gonna produce something. It's not gonna matter. I don't really care about it that much. It's not gonna be that big of a deal. I'm telling myself all this to not get my hopes up and not to get too attached. But anyway, that was really all I knew was the title, McGillicuddy and Murders Pawn Shop. It kind of popped in my head. I think I have an ancestor named McGillicuddy, which is kind of cute. But I liked the ring of it. I thought it was mysterious. I went with pawn shop because I wasn't sure if in 1920s antique stores were really as big of a thing. But I think the modern day equivalent would not be a pawn shop. It would be an antique store. Also, pawn shop is, it's a little mysterious sounding, which I think is great. Genuinely had no idea in the world what on earth the murder meant until I wrote about it in season 2. So I spent all of season 1 just being like, sure, it's McGillicuddy and Murders Pawn Shop. I don't know what the murder's all about, but we're going to figure that out later. But so, yeah, I sat down. That's all I knew. I knew I wanted it to be first person narrated just because then I wouldn't have to do as many character voices, which I didn't feel secure enough to do. And I sat down and I just wrote it. I wrote the whole thing from start to finish, and you can probably hear how nostalgic I feel in my voice right now. Just the little line about how her hat melted. And I don't know, I think right away it kind of felt like coming home. And it felt like a different experience to anything I'd ever had before. And I think there was a kind of magic in knowing that what I was writing was going to be seen. And I think I showed up for that writing in a way that I hadn't before. Because everything else had been kind of demoralizing. Like, you producing it, but, some agent is going to read 5 lines and throw it in a trash can, but this I knew would be seen. And I think this experience really changed me as a writer. So you can all take credit if I have a future success as a novelist. You can be like, ha, I did that. I gave her confidence. And of course I did it too. I'm not, letting you guys take all the credit. I know I did great. And that's something that I need to learn more as a person is I'm doing great. But anyway, that was a really magical experience to sit down in that coffee shop and write the first episode from start to finish. And then again, from there, I just figured it out as I went. Every episode, 1 episode at a time. I know, I posted the first episode before I even knew Maud's name. It was super, super spur of the moment, which I think is so fun. But I think I've answered the 2 questions now. Why did it begin and how did it begin? One of the other really important things that I really want to talk about is the origin of Noble's character. And of course, I think quite a few of you are wondering about, Maud being queer and whether or not that is something that is authentic to me as well. So I will get to that in a minute. But to talk really transparently and openly about Noble, the first thing I'll say is I did not handle diversity in this series with the courage and the openness that I would like to have. So I want to say sorry from the bottom of my heart. I could have done better. I should have done better. And I want to do better in the future. The few of you who pointed out moments where, I could have done things differently or I should have done things differently. Some of you sent me great ideas for ways that things could be better. Sorry, I just hit my mug with my ring if you heard that. But you sent me ideas for ways things could be handled more appropriately in future seasons. And you were also incredibly kind and just open and gentle with me. And thank you so much for that. Please continue to keep me accountable throughout my career To be human is to not understand as well as we should and to continue to make mistakes. And I can guarantee that there will be moments I'm not as proud of in my career as a writer, but I can just as passionately guarantee that I want to do this well. Please have conversations with me, make me aware of things, help me understand, so that I can do better. But I think the big question that I want to answer is, a lot of you were wondering, there was kind of that surprise moment in season 4, which is not knowing that Noble was Black. And that's coming, totally out of left field. And it was super sudden. And I know a lot of you went back and were like, whoa, did I miss this somehow? You definitely did not miss this. It was not meant to be something that you picked up on. It's also not something that I added in later seasons. I didn't just add it to kind of be a little bit more politically correct. It was something that at the time I realized I needed to be more transparent about, because I had been writing this I had been invisible and really, really cowardly about it and just kind of keeping it to myself. And so I really wanted to open that up and make sure that that was incredibly clear in the narrative as well. There are a couple of moments where you can kind of see me sort of trying to remain within historical accuracy. The fact that Noble is working as a bellboy at the hotel rather than staying at the hotel. He has so much money as a magic unusual. Why is he doing that? Or even sort of the strange reaction of the hospital staff when Maud tries to visit him in season 1 after he's been stabbed. Realistically, Noble would not even have been admitted into most hospitals. But I chose instead to just have the hospital staff have kind of a strange reaction to Maud's visiting him. But the perfectly accurate response to has Noble always been Black is that he has been Black since episode 6. So I mentioned that I started it really spur of the moment and from the hip. And I had just watched, what was that movie? It was Lost in Austenland, which is a hilarious, adorable movie. I just watched it with some friends of mine, I think 2 days before I started this episode, and the very first episode of the podcast. And I was thinking about, the cute boy that she ends up with at the end. And I was like, oh, a romantic subplot could be good. I should probably throw a romantic subplot in here. So at that point, he was a paper cutout character. No name, no face, no personality. He just had a cute newsboy cap. Whatever. I threw him in there. It's all good. But then by the time I got to episode 6, I was really falling in love with this story. I loved the phrase night enthusiasts. I was like, oh my gosh, I hope this works out well because I love that name so much. I'm so passionate about it. I was falling in love with Maud. I was loving Maud. And by the time it was time for her to really meet Noble as a character, that was when I pulled his personality and his name and kind of the core elements of him from another book that I had been working on about a year prior. And so Noble's name it's based on Noble Sisley, who was a composer in the Harlem Renaissance. He worked for Broadway, produced a lot of different things. And I just think it's a wonderful name. And of course, it works so beautifully for Noble with that, that tie into the goodness of his character. So at the moment that I named Noble, that was when he became a Black character. And from there, I have known, but I didn't expect you guys to know or pick up on that. And again, I could have and I should have handled that situation differently. So please forgive me. Please bear with me, learn with me, help me grow, and help me to continue to represent the way that I would like to represent. And kind of tying into representation is the other half of the diversity in this series, which is Maud's bisexuality. And yes, I am bisexual. Ta-da! There's a lot of backstory that I would love to share about Maud being bisexual. So, oh gosh, I don't even know where to begin. So when I started the series, I thought I was straight. I grew up very religious. Some of you can probably tell based on how prim Maud is that I grew up religious. Anyone who also has a religious background, I think can understand just, especially as a woman, you feel very old-fashioned. You're raised in such an old-fashioned way that you feel a lot more kinship to women who lived 100 years ago than modern women because you just live in, it's a completely different world. And so there's a lot to talk about with that, but a lot of, it's hard when you have a lot of trauma to be really in touch with yourself. But I think anyone who was raised super conservative, especially in kind of the purity movement, of the late 90s and the 2000s, there's very legitimate sexual trauma that happens with that. And my husband had found some really great resources that were helping him. I encourage you to look it up if for any reason that's something that you have dealt with personally. There's a lot of wonderful material. There's a lot of healing that can and should be happening there. But I kind of went through a lot of the material and started to be more open and honest with myself. There's just so much of my sexuality I had just put to death because I was raised to believe that you're not supposed to feel anything at all. You know, so you're supposed to be completely without sexual impulses or a sexual identity or anything like that. I mean, that's one way of putting it. It's very complicated, but so essentially I was just deliberately out of sync with myself. And the minute I said, hey, I'm gonna start getting in touch with myself. I'm gonna, figure out who I am and just, start being more open. And I realize this is getting a little bit personal, but I'm a very personal person. But this is just my journey, and I'm very happy to be transparent with all of you. But as I started to kind of, want to be authentic with myself and I guess develop, I had never developed properly. I've been very developmentally stunted in a lot of ways. But as I just opened up my heart and started feeling what I wanted to feel, a couple months in, I looked at my husband and I was like, I think I might be bisexual. And he immediately was like, oh, you totally are. It was really sweet. Like, he immediately was like, oh, that makes so much sense. And it's not even anything that I'd done. There was just this core sense of like, oh, yeah, like, of course you are. And, from there, like, it became sort of charming and embarrassingly obvious looking at, moments from my childhood and the way that I'd always reacted and who I'd had crushes on in movies, even as a little kid, pre-puberty, like who I'd really swooned over. It was like, of course I'm bisexual. I've always been bisexual. But I figured that out, right before the end of season 3. So I left a clue at the end of season 3 that was where this was trending. I had a couple of months in between to figure things out, get more in sync with myself, and then really kind of came out in season 4. But something really magical and important that I want to point out is that I mentioned at the top of this that I struggle a lot with essentially what is PTSD symptoms, very similar to PTSD symptoms, being constantly in fight or flight. I spent a lot of my time not having energy for a lot of things, very stressed out all the time, ending the day super exhausted, collapsed on the couch, not feeling the bandwidth to handle much in terms of my career or like my day-to-day. I was really just coasting and really feeling exhausted kind of all the time because of the kind of the strain that I was under. And again, it was hard to even understand that it was strain because it has been chronic my entire life. And it felt very normal. So I didn't really understand how things could feel differently. But it wasn't the moment that I recorded the episode. It wasn't the moment that I posted the episode. It wasn't the moment that people that I knew had listened to the episode. The moment that I wrote the words down in that episode where, Maud basically comes out, and I, tried to make it a little clear that this was personal for me as well. I was coming out to the listener as well. The moment those words kind of left my fingers and left the keyboard, something shifted. And from that moment, it was so little in healing and in therapy happens like a magic spell. It takes a lot of time. It's very gradual. It takes a lot of work. But this was one of those moments that was like pure magic. And from that moment, I had more energy and I had more peace. And I started to be so much more productive from that moment forward, like legitimately and consistently, because it was just so impactful to get this off my chest and be myself and be out. It genuinely, it changed my life. And the moment, it's just so sweet. The moment was the moment I wrote it down, and I knew that I was going to tell all of you and anyone who listened. It was really powerful for me. It healed something. Again, like magic. It was like a magic spell. It was really profound. But just the only other cute things I want to share with that is, again, with being bisexual but not even understanding it myself, there was a really sweet moment where my husband finished season 1, and right away he was like, I really love the lesbian overtones, with Ariana and Maud, and I was like, what are you talking about? That's what are you talking about? I was just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. There's definitely nothing there. I don't know. You're just being really weird right now. I totally shrugged him off. And then what's also so sweet is I posted on Twitter just a while ago, about a year or 6 months ago, I had gotten someone had changed the review from a 5-star to a 4-star and just said some things that were, I was concerned that they were, being a little disgusted or a little bit hurtful about Maud coming out. They didn't want it to get political. Of course, this isn't political. This is personal for me. So, but I sensed that, they used to love it. And now they were like, I don't know if I like this anymore. I just feel weird about it. And kind of reading between the lines, I think it was because Maud is bisexual. And I was just feeling sort of gutted about that. I think I posted on Twitter that I wanted to drown in my coffee. It just wasn't a good feeling. But then a fan who has been around since almost the beginning, and I was so impressed because she's really cool. She's like a grown woman with an awesome career, and because I stalked her on Twitter, because of course I did, and it's like, oh my god, you like my audio drama, it's so encouraging. But she posted, which I also love that she's been around for multiple years now, still in sync with my Twitter feed, which is also very encouraging. But she said, she's like, if someone hadn't seen that coming from the beginning of the podcast, basically they should have seen that coming. Then they weren't paying attention. Oh, that was it. It was like, if they hadn't seen that coming from the beginning, then they weren't paying attention. Which is so sweet and so lovely to say, but also so humorous because I didn't see it coming from the beginning of the podcast, so I wasn't paying attention. And I just think that's so lovely, that element of the story was there, and it was clear to this woman I've never met, and it was clear to my husband, but it wasn't even clear to me. But that subconscious storyline was beginning already, and I think that's really, really awesome. I only have a few more fun facts to share before this behind the scenes episode is over and I stop dithering at you all. I realize we have passed the half-hour mark, so I'm very proud that I have enough stuff that I can, ramble on for more than half an hour. But one of the last fun things to mention is what the heck is going on with Death to All Mice? That again was super spur of the moment. I just wanted there to be something weird in that moment. So I was like, oh, she'll see something weird written on the wall. And what should it say? Oh, I don't know. Death to all mice. Whatever. And I had no idea where that was going to go. I just put it on the wall. And then at the end in the cave, just having her yell it 3 times. And then, sure, why not? Plague mask things with cloaks on. Sure, whatever. They'll show up. It all just happened very spur of the moment. But in terms of what does Death to all mice mean? That philosophy is something that I have thought about a lot. When I was in Washington, D.C. During the Smithsonian Holocaust Memorial Museum, in the bookstore, I stopped and read about 2 pages of a book, and I don't remember the title of the book anymore, but it was basically proposing that the only way that human beings can commit atrocities to one another is if they mentally eradicate the humanity of the other person. And I mean, we see that a lot. There has to be propaganda for a lot of the worst, especially racial crimes that have been committed throughout history. Something about the organization, they're able to convince someone that the other group is less than human. Because if we really believe that someone actually has the same level of humanity and feelings and morality that we do, we're simply not able to commit these horrible actions. And so I'm sure it's still a bit confusing in the podcast, and I'm sure I don't really explain it as well as I would like, but that's kind of the philosophy behind that phrase. Is that that's what that means, is you can only truly commit evil if you stop believing in the humanity of someone else. And so, of course, the cure to that is to somehow instill in our children and instill in ourselves and our communities that no one on the planet has less humanity than we do. And that's really one of the core evil philosophies in the world that needs to be eradicated the most, is just this idea that we can, stop believing that that someone else is other, that they're different from us, and they're different enough from us that they're not as human as we are. So in case anyone was curious about kind of where that came from or what that means, you might be still just as confused, but that is my attempt at explaining that philosophy, and I do think about that a lot, and I think that's probably a theme that will show up in my fiction again sometime in the future. But last but not least, I'm trying to think of what else I can say. I think if there are moments about the ending that you're a little bit confused on, like, I wonder why she took it in that direction. I wonder why she made that choice. Without giving anything away, since I know this episode is being released before the last episode, a lot of the choices that I made were often because there's a parallel to that moment in my real life. Maybe if something ends unresolved, it's because that's based on a real problem that I'm dealing with. That is genuinely unresolved, and I have no idea how it's going to resolve. So all that being said, producing this podcast has been one of the pleasures and privileges of my life. I am genuinely grateful to you all. I genuinely feel this lovely sort of magical, distant connection with you all. I appreciate you all, whether you're listening to this live or many years later. I hope to continually produce stories, and I hope that we are able to connect in the future over novels and future podcasts and so much of what I do. So I have a lot more stories. I have a lot more secrets. I have a lot more things to say. There will be more behind the scenes episodes where I share even more fascinating details. But that's the close of this one for now. Please be kind to yourselves. And as Rath says, make sure you find the center of life, because it is waiting for you and it is absolutely wonderful. So until the next story, I love you all. And thank you for listening to McGillicuddy and Murders Pawn Shop.